Good evening, everyone. I'm Elsie Arnson, Montana State Superintendent. We'll be getting real shortly here. This is one of 4 community discussions that we're going to be having over our legislative action that occurred. So today is going to be a discussion, a side-by-side discussion of some pieces of legislation that made it through the process in this legislative session as well to the governor's desk. And I'd like to go ahead and introduce Jenna McKinney.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I'm sorry, I'm not sure why my camera is not working, but we appreciate your time this evening. We know it's precious. And we'd like to introduce Rob Stutz, our Chief Legal Counsel. He's going to be moderating this meeting. If you have any questions, you can put them in the chat box. We will have a Q&A at the end, so if you can wait, we will have an opportunity to get your questions answered. Rob?
Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you for attending this community discussion tonight. My name is Rob Stutz. I'm the Chief Legal Counsel here at the Office of Public Instruction, and I appreciate the interest that's shown in this discussion. Just so that we're clear, the information that the Office of Public Instruction is providing tonight is general information about the legislation, legal advice about how anybody should proceed in any particular situation. But
Rob, if I can interrupt for a moment, there is a lot of interference. If you could please mute somebody with iPhone. If you could please mute your microphone.
Coming up, we're going to hear from the attorney representing rapper Kodak Black, who was sentenced to more than 3 years in prison. He was charged with the same federal weapons crime as
whoever's on iPhone 406-371-6704, can you please mute your microphone?
First tonight, we begin with the blockbuster. Way too late and too few indictments. But anyway, it's on Capitol Hill.
Perfect.
great, thanks. Thanks for taking care of that, Jenna. This is not a substitute for legal advice that you would have in any particular situation about how to, implement this legislation. But this overview, hopefully you'll find it helpful, both in the information and some of the tools that we're able to provide to you about the legislation. I also need to mention that the House Bill 562, the status of that, it is being litigated. The state of Montana has been served with a lawsuit seeking to declare House Bill 562 unconstitutional. And I wanted to make you aware that that is something that is under present litigation. If you're interested, temporary restraining order was denied here in district court, but there's going to be a hearing on July 17th about whether preliminary injunction should be issued regarding House Bill 562. With that being said, I do want to mention that because this is a community discussion, if anybody has an immediate question that they need an answer to, please feel free to raise your hand and Jenna will look out for it and see if it's something that we can address to help the conversation moving forward. But if you have a question that can wait, please wait till either put it in the chat or wait till after the overview so that we can make sure that everybody has a chance to have their questions addressed at the end. But if there's something that needs immediate attention, please let us know and we'll address it as best as we can. So, and I'm going to share a screen here. So the place that I want to begin in this conversation is just a little bit of context. The charter school bills are not Montana's first attempt to, I just want to make sure, am I sharing the screen with 1055-604?
Yes, and Rob, if you would bring it up a little bit, not that it's small print, but if there's a possible way for you to enlarge the print?
Sure.
Thank
Let me
you.
see what I can do. Does that help?
Perfect. I believe so. That's great. Thank you.
So the Board of Public Education has adopted a rule. It's currently in 1055-604, but it'll soon be transferred to 1055-608, called variance to standards. That rule, and I'm sorry if I'm scrolling too quickly, down in paragraph 11 does have a process by which public charter can be created, authorized by the Board of Public Education. That's current law, and that remains as part of law. What the legislation does is the legislation provides more flexibility in how education is delivered. And so those two bills, one of them provides for the public charter schools as a statutory approach, and another one provides for community choice schools. But those options, or at least the option of a public charter, already exists in Montana law, and I wanted to let you know that because the legislation does something different, but it doesn't do anything. It's consistent with Montana having some flexibility already in how the public education services are delivered. The other thing, and I'm not sure what everybody's familiarity is with the legislative process, and so I'll just do a little review here. For those who are more experienced, I apologize in advance if this is old news, but on the Montana's legislative website, there's all sorts of information about these bills. You can navigate to the website at ledge.mt.gov, and there's a way to look up specific bills, including House Bill 562 and House Bill 549. And when you navigate to those pages about the bill, there are a couple things that you can do that are going to be really helpful as you consider the legislation. One of them is you can look at the bill text through both a website link and a PDF link. You also have information about the legislative process for the bill, and that's true for both of these bills. You can see that. Another thing that's noteworthy is that each of these bills has a legal review note that provides information from the legislative attorneys about potential questions that could be raised about the bills. And so it's a little bit of an assurance that when the legislature was considering these bills and having the conversation about whether to adopt them or not, they were aware of all sorts of different considerations, both through the legislative process on the floor in the committees with the public feedback, as well as the internal commentary that they received from legislative support staff. So with that context, let's talk a little bit about the bills themselves. So I'm going to start off with House Bill 549. I'm just going to pull up the language of the bill. And it's a lot of words, and the purpose of this conversation is to try to talk about some of the more unique things about this public charter school bill. What this bill does in a nutshell is it creates public charters that allows public charters to be created under the supervision of the Board of Public Education. They would be responsible for approving or denying the public charter schools. And those schools would exist as separate LEAs. They could exist as separate LEAs, different than the current school districts. So for example, the bill explicitly provides that the land area covered by the school district the charter school would be a separate district that is governed by a board that's not the local board of trustees. And there is one additional, excuse me, while I try to identify it, there's one additional piece of this conversation I wanted to make available. Jenna, do you know where online we have our comparison of the bills? I think that's right off of our webpage, isn't it?
Yep, if you go to the main page of OPI and under parent resource off to the right, on the very top, if you go
Perfect.
to the meeting today, that's right there.
Great, thank you. So OPI has prepared this comparison of the different legislation, House Bill 549 and House Bill 562. And those are available, as Jenna described, through the OPI website. Those link to the exact language of the bill, if you wanted to see the specific language. But what I want to talk about is this comparison here on the chart, so we can see some of the things that these bills provide in common and some of the things that they provide differently. So under House Bill 549, when we establish public charter schools, we can also establish public charter school districts. Under House Bill 562, the community choice schools can be established, but separate school districts are not established. Under 549, who may apply for public charter school are applicants, residents in the school district, or the local school board itself can submit a proposal to create a public charter school. Under 562, those applicants wouldn't necessarily reside in the school district, and the school district itself wouldn't be the applicant for a community choice school. Under both of these bills, the Board of Public Education plays a role. Under 549, the Board of Public Education is responsible for reviewing and approving or denying the proposals for the public charter schools. Under 562, there's a separate community choice school.
House Bill 562, what will prevent sex offenders from working in community choice schools? Somebody's asked a question.
Oh, excuse me, if you have a question, if you can just put it in the chat box, we will try to get to the questions as we go. Thank you.
So under House Bill 562, there is a community choice school commission. That commission is comprised of individuals who are appointed by statewide elected officials, including majority and minority members of the legislature. That commission would serve as the entity that would either authorize those applications for a community choice school, or they could also authorize the local school district to be the authorizing entity. So there's some flexibility in allowing the local school district to be that authorizing entity. It's not necessarily reserved for the statewide commission.
So Rob, let's go ahead and stop right here. And thank you, Jenna. Is there any questions over what Rob has said at this point? So we can have that communication. And I believe I did hear from one entity. I don't know if indeed that it was regarding the points that you just went over, Rob, but let's begin the discussion and see what we've got. So is there anything that anyone would like to say over those points of who authorizes, or anything that Rob has shared on how the bills progressed or how to find the current language of the legislation? And then Jenna, let's get into the chat box and just answer a couple questions. Okay.
So Rob, there is a question on from Michael, under HB 562, what will prevent sex offenders from working in community choice schools?
Okay, so let's look at that question. I'm going to reshare my screen.
Yep.
So hopefully you've got House Bill 562 up on your screen. I'll try to make it a little bit larger.
Thank you, Rob. Looks good. Yep.
Okay, and so in House Bill 562, I'm just going to do a quick search for the word fingerprint. And you can see on page 25 of the bill, and I'm sorry, I'm going to scroll up so I can direct you to the section of the bill. It's in section 14 of the bill, and it is paragraph 8C. It provides the teachers and other school personnel, as well as governing board members, are subject to criminal history record checks and fingerprinting requirements. That's the same type of check that's done for teachers when they are licensed under the Board of Public Education current licensing standards. And I will also note, I'm going to hop over to House Bill 549.
I don't want to listen to this.
That when I do a similar search, you can see that there's similar background check, fingerprint check requirement also in House Bill 549. Does that answer your question?
Rob, I think that answers the question. I have another question from Charles. It says, are the boards of these schools elected by local general public?
All right. Well, that's a good question. So, and I apologize, let me just get to the appropriate place in my notes. So under 549, the governing boards are elected. They're not governed by the local school board unless
Isn't this the
it's
number
a
for
public
Ann?
charter school.
I wrote back to that number saying, I'm sorry, I don't know who this is.
I'm sorry, whoever has iPhone 406-371-6704, can you please mute? We can hear you. Thank you.
So each of the bills has provisions, including the election of the governing boards. And the summary is available on our website. I've got the language up here. If you guys want more specific information, I'm happy to dive down into the specifics of each of the bills. But there is a process for the governing boards to be elected.
Rob, I have another question from Michael. He says, do community choice schools have to follow Montana Constitution and teach Indian education for all? If not, why?
Right. So that's a great question. And again, keeping in mind that this is general advice, not legal advice. Yes, they have to comply with the Montana Constitution. These are publicly funded educational institutions. Jenna, were there any other questions?
Yeah, Cheryl had a question, and I think she's asking if the charter school teachers, she said private school, but these are not private, they're charter schools. Are those teachers subject to OPI licensing?
So that's an interesting question. It's a question that is in part beyond the scope of this legislation, because this past session, the legislature provided some more flexibility in
As in, no.
in licensing teachers. But Nonetheless, under 562, the educational services can be provided by outside entities. They can be essentially contracted for. And so those contracted services wouldn't necessarily include teachers licensed by OPI.
Rob, she had a follow-up question too. The follow-up question is it typical for charter schools in other states to only have boards elected by those attending and working at the school?
I'm not familiar enough with the variety of different legislative schemes across the country to really compare Montana's scheme to how it works in other states. I'm most familiar with the existing charter school scheme that the Board of Public Education established years ago that's in rule. It'll be interesting to see how this legislation, how it develops over the years. For example, this is the first year, well, the legislation isn't even in effect yet. Both of these pieces of legislation don't take effect until July 1st. Nonetheless, it'll be interesting to see over the years how the legislature addresses
public vote in the board elections for community choice schools. Isn't this a violation of Montana Constitution?
I'm sorry, was that a question? I didn't hear the first part because I was talking.
iPhone 406-371-6704. Can you please repeat your question? I think we can just move forward.
Yeah, and so just to finish what I was saying, this is the first iteration of these types of bills, the community choice and the public charter bills. And so no doubt there will be some amendments to this scheme over the years. And so it'll be interesting to see how that develops. But, to answer the original question, how it compares to different legislative schemes for charter bills in other states, I don't know.
Rob, there's another question from Dawn. Oh, sorry, my scrolled up there. Please answer my question about the funding on annual educational budget. Is it expanded, or will public schools see contracted budgets? Sorry, Dawn, I'm trying to keep up on the questions.
Thank you.
Yeah. So the funding mechanisms vary somewhat between these two bills. And I'm not a funding expert. We have folks here at OPI who work with school finance every day, and they might be able to answer some more specific questions. But nonetheless, I have read the bills and I'm familiar with their funding schemes. And my takeaway is that funding for public education isn't affected by either of these bills. There is a transfer of funding from existing schools to the newly created charter schools. And that would be expected anytime a new school opens and students migrate from an existing school to a newly created school. There would be changes in the flow of the dollars, but the overall funding is not reduced. I should mention that there is the possibility of increased funding under 549 because the public charter schools would, once open, would be eligible for what we call an additional budget unit. That's a base entitlement for the school, and that depends on the type of school. So there is some possibility of overall an increase in funding, but as far as a decrease in funding, it would change how the money flows, but I don't know of a mechanism that would reduce the overall funding under these bills. And I'll point to our comparison chart that discusses in summary fashion the funding mechanisms in each of the bills. On the left side here, we have a overview of the funding under House Bill 549. And on the right side, we have an overview of the funding under House Bill 562. And it varies a little bit under 549, depending on whether the public charter school was governed by the local school board or whether the public charter school was created as part of a new public school district. Does that answer your question?
Rob, there's actually another question from
That's
Michael.
okay. We're a community discussion, so this is
Yep.
good to get the exact questions answered that people have. And if I can't answer them, I'll let them know that too.
Michael's question is, why can't the general public vote in board elections for community choice schools? Is this not a violation of the Montana Constitution?
Yeah, so let me just pull that up real quick. So as to the question of whether it's a violation of the Montana Constitution, I'm not going to offer a legal opinion on that. I will note that legislation is presumed to be constitutional until it's demonstrated that it's not. And certainly that's the process I described earlier, where there are constitutional challenges to House Bill 562. But as far as the mechanism for those elections, let's see, I'm going to highlight this. It's not going to look particularly pretty. The election process must include the following requirements. So this is in House Bill 562 under section 14. This is subsection 1F, and then 1, 2, 3, etc. So the process for how those elections proceed is described here in the legislation. The constitutionality of that is, perhaps going to be one of the things that's litigated. But in any event, I hope that that directs you to the right part of the bill that answers your question.
Rob, there's a question from Cheryl to follow up.
Okay.
She asked if private school teachers are subject to OPI licensing. I thought perhaps she meant charter, but she did not. And I guess it's more of a comment. I know private schools in Gallatin County that have people without teaching degrees. So there's, I guess, a question of whether that is under OPI or not.
Okay, so one of the trends, and this isn't specific to House Bill 549 or House Bill 562, but one of the trends that already exists in Montana law, but that we've also seen addressed during the legislative session, is looking for some flexibility in allowing teachers, for example, for a long time in Montana, we've allowed, even at public schools, the emergency authorization of individuals who are not licensed teachers to teach at schools if there are no licensed teachers available. There's been increasing growth of shortfall in the number of teachers needed or available here in Montana to meet the need. And so that crisis of for finding licensed teacher is one that exists in Montana, sort of independent of either of these two bills. We do have tools, and we have had tools for a number of years that allow unlicensed individuals to teach in schools when necessary, but again, that's not specific to these bills. And Superintendent, I saw you nodding. I didn't know if you wanted to say a few words about the teacher shortage in Montana.
Thank you for that, Rob. We know it exists, and in a future view, we believe that there may be over 1,000 unoccupied classrooms by Montana licensed teachers. So looking to make sure that we have quality, not dilute the quality for quantity. So we're putting lots of efforts and energy into that. In fact, we have our 6th virtual job fair, where we have not just rural school districts come, but we have applicants as well as some of our large districts come to see who is available. We've opened reciprocity with other states, of course, with safeguards for that quality. But we do recognize as the 4th aged state in the nation that the supply issue of teachers as retirements occur is challenged by the demand. So thank you, Rob, for that. But I appreciate, Jenna, are there any other questions that might be in the chat box?
Oh, we just got one here. It seems you are skirting the constitutional issues brought up in the legal note on HB 562. I believe at the beginning of this meeting, it was mentioned that these charter schools operate. Sorry, they're coming in a little quick, so it's moving it up. Operate under the direction of OPI, correct?
So no, the charter schools don't operate under the direction of OPI. So under, for example, 549, those charter schools operate under a board. It could be the located school districts board, or it could be a separate school district just for the charter school. Under 562, it's a different board, but nonetheless not under OPI's oversight. OPI under 562 basically has 2 roles. One role is in assigning someone to as a member of the commission that reviews whether to authorize those applications for the community choice schools. OPI has one individual that it places on that board, and the other individuals are placed by, like I mentioned earlier, the governor or majority and minority members leadership of the legislature. So that's one of OPI's roles under 562. The other primary role that OPI plays is has to do with the transfer of funding. The determination of funding isn't made by OPI, but by and large, OPI's biggest role, frankly, is making sure that the dollars get to the school district so that they can provide the services to the students. And so there's a formula in statute for how that funding is calculated, and OPI makes sure that that gets implemented according to that formula. But as far as oversight of the governing boards, that's not one of OPI's roles. But because the question about the constitutionality came up, will just point out that if we go back to 562 and we pull up the legal review note, and I'll just open that up real quickly. The legal review note, and this is a little bit hard to see, I'll just zoom in on it. This was generated for the legislature's consideration by legislative staff, and this is to inform the legislature of potential issues, but certainly it is not a decision. It has no, well, we'll just let them speak for themselves. The review is not dispositive of the constitutional issues. They raise questions, and then the requester has the opportunity to comment. So if you are an attorney, or if you have a friend who's an attorney, or if there's someone who really is interested in that level of review, I would encourage you to go to the legislative page, navigate to House Bill 562, pull up the legal review note, and make an informed decision about your view of it. But the legal review note does raise a constitutional issue, but it explicitly does not address that question in a dispositive way. That would be a determination for the courts, which we are seeing now with 562.
Rob, I have another question for you from Megan. Can you explain why Montanans have historically been against public charter schools and why we're passing them now? Also, what is the timeline like? Will we possibly see the first one in the fall of 2025?
Okay, those are two totally different questions. So let's see how we can handle them. So historically, as far as the motivation for why Montana has approached charter schools the way that it has, I guess the best answer I can give you is that is what the Board of Public Education has allowed under its rules. And the legislature did not previously address the question. And so when you look down in the Board of Public Education rules, and these are the this is the rule that I was talking about, is 1055-608. This rule has been in place for a long time, 604. This rule has been in place for quite a while. It was initially adopted. The variance to standards rule has been in place since 1989. I don't know when the public charter provision of it was put in rule, but this rule hasn't been amended since 2013. So it's been at least a decade. So we do have that history with charter schools in Montana, but they haven't been used very much. And I don't know the reason for that, but there are several charter schools that do exist in Montana as public charter schools under the current scheme. And I believe they're both in the Bozeman area. So there is a history. It's not particularly broad, but there is a history here in Montana of having public charter schools.
Rob, next question. Oh, I'm sorry. Are you ready for the next question?
Yeah, what was the second question?
This is actually a different question from Michael. Under HB 562, will uncertified teachers be writing IEPs and teaching special education students?
Okay, those are good questions. Let's look at that real quick. So under both bills, the school must comply with federal special education law. And I've got, let me just, and I apologize, I'm sort of doing this because I'm jumping around between documents. So let's see, under 562, there has to be the disciplinary policies have to be described, including those for special education students. A choice school, so this is again under 562, is responsible for meeting the requirements of an LEA under applicable federal, state, local laws, including those relating to special education. So under 562, the legislation specifically addresses the state and federal obligation to provide special education, whatever that looks like. And a real quick search, let's look under 549 special. Has a similar provision about discipline, and it has the similar requirement that it meets the requirements of an LEA under federal, state, local laws, and then specifically identifying special education. Does that answer the question?
So moving on to the next question, Dawn has a question. So a point of clarification, I think. She says, so I am understanding that the charters will first try to hire licensed teachers from Montana or other states before allowing non-educated and teaching individuals to be teachers?
So the specific, and let me just, like I mentioned, these aren't kind of make sure that I get us to the right place in regarding hiring of teachers. You know, was the question, Jenna, particular to one or the other of the bills?
No, it's just trying to clarify if Montana licensed teachers or other state licensed teachers will be hired for education before non-licensed educators.
Well, I'm just going to take a stab in the dark, and you guys can watch me learn my lesson on the fly. Let's see.
I apologize, Rob. The beginning of the question does clarify that that is specific to the charters.
To the public charter, which would be 549. Employees in public charter schools have the same rights and privileges as other public employees, except as otherwise provided. They're not required to be members of any existing collective bargaining agreement. However, the public charter school may not interfere with laws protecting the rights of employees to organize and be free from discrimination. So there are, and I don't know that that specifically addresses the question as far as the priority of the hiring. I should note that one thing that these pieces of legislation have in common is that each of them requires the charter to be organized under let me just pull it up here, a charter contract. And whether that contract is with the Board of Public Education on under House Bill 549, or whether that charter contract is with the authorizing or the authorizer under 562. The authorizer could be the local school district, or it could be the state commission, either one. Nonetheless, under both bills, the charter contract can establish a lot of the obligations and frankly, some of the culture of the school. And so that could be that responsibility as far as where to look for the employees could be built into the charter contract. And that's really one of the things that's different in this legislation from the charter, the existing charter rule, is that it provides for these charter contracts that let the local school districts or the local applicants for the charter school define what the school will be like. Is it going to be a special purpose school, a STEM school, or whatnot? And so quite a few of these questions might be addressed, not necessarily in the legislation, but in the contract, the charter contract that's established between the authorizing entity and the charter school.
Thank you, Rob. The next question is from Erica. Are charter schools bound to ADA and IDEA requirements?
Right, and so that would be the IDEA, or the special education requirements that we looked at earlier, and we can see that the even though it's not specifically addressed the way special education is, ADA is a federal law that applies to employers, and we've got this catch-all that says the choice school is responsible for meeting the requirements of an LEA under federal law.
Rob, there's also a request to repeat just the basics of the legal action some of the people that were just coming on at the beginning missed part of that and just wanted to hear you repeat that so they understood what was happening.
Sure. So the status is, so we're talking about two bills. We've got House Bill 549 and we've got House Bill 562. 562, there may be other litigation that I'm unaware of, but for House Bill 562, the Office of Public Instruction has been served with a lawsuit, along with the state of Montana, along with the governor's office, challenging the constitutionality of House Bill 562. And the status is that the district court judge has rejected the initial request for a temporary restraining order, requesting that enforcement of the legislation be restrained. The timing of that, I'll just mention, the bill doesn't become effective until July 1st. And so the plaintiffs were seeking to enjoin that legislation before it became effective. That being said, they also have requested a preliminary injunction. And so that's asking for injunctive relief before a final decision in the litigation. That preliminary injunction is set for hearing on July 17th here in Helena.
Thank you, Rob. Let's see, there's
Jenna, if I can.
Yeah.
Let me just, there was a question much earlier in the conversation about Indian Education for All. And so I just wanted to jump to a few places in the bills where that's
Great.
discussed. So in
that might answer the next question as well. So thank you.
Okay. So in 562 at the beginning, one of the purposes of the bill is to advance Montana's commitment to preservation of American Indian cultural identity, etc. So that's one of the references in the purpose of the bill. There's consideration of the per A and B rate as part of the funding for Indian education. So there's both a purpose and a funding mechanism discussed in House Bill 562. With regard to House Bill 549, that also is referenced in the purpose section of the bill. And in the funding section, this, like in 562, provides that 100% of the A and B, that's the per student funding for Indian Education for All. Well, excuse me, not the A and B. That's the Indian Education for All payment is a part of the calculation, and then also the American Indian Achievement Gap payment. So both of the bills address American Indian IFA, American Indian Education for All goals as part of the purpose and as part of the funding mechanism. Also, I guess I should just continue. That is also part of the constitutional obligation for public schools in Montana, is to provide Indian education for all. So even if it were unsaid in the legislation, it would still be part of the education program. Jenna, are there any more questions?
So there is one more question here. So is there a separate statute in HB 562 that requires Indian education for all, even though community choice schools are exempt from Title 20?
So again, looking at 562, it's both in the purpose of the bill and in the funding, but more specifically, I guess, is Indian Education for All isn't just a statutory requirement in Montana. It's part of our Montana Constitution. And so when we navigate to the Montana Constitution and we look in the Constitution under education, we can see that built into the Constitution is the recognition of the distinct and unique cultural heritage of the American Indians and the commitment in its educational goals to the preservation of the American Indian cultural integrity. So it is addressed in a broader sense with regard to the purpose and the funding in the legislation, but there's also the unique and important requirement in the Montana Constitution for the Indian education for all.
Thank you. Okay, we're getting close to the end. Do you want to open it up so folks can be more interactive and ask questions directly to Rob? We just have a few minutes left.
And what else?
There's several questions queued up, and I'm trying to keep up with them. So I don't know that we're going to get to everybody's question, but if you would like to join in and ask a question to Rob directly.
Hi, Rob. This is Cheryl. I have one quick question that I just threw in the chat. And I
Okay,
thought I would, just since she opened it up to a verbal question. I was wondering if you can explain what sort of mechanisms there are under HB 562 that would make sure that the students are learning, that they are meeting, are they going to be testing? Is there a review process to make sure that these schools are succeeding? What are those success points? If you could speak to that, that would be great.
sure. And I'm going to cheat a little bit here. So you can see in the title of the bill that one component of it is providing for performance measures. That is a necessary part of the charter contract, that there be performance expectations. And again, I apologize, but I believe, as I recall, it's a little bit scattered throughout. The commission, so that under 562 is the appointed body that authorizes the community choice schools. The commission reports back to the Board of Public Education about the academic performance. This is in the establish an annual application and approval process, including, let's see. Oh, each interested local school board. So under 562, a local school board can become an authorizer. It's not limited to the commission authorizing the community choice schools. And so they would explain in their application to be an authorizer their performance goals. Monitoring in accordance with the contract, the performance. Let's see, performance contract there. Yeah, and I apologize. I'm not going to be able to do this all through all 52 references in the bill, but certainly if you were to go to 562 and do a search for the performance expectations, performance standards, the performance reporting requirements, you'll get a sense of how that bill addresses your questions.
Can I
Hi,
ask
I
a question?
have another question. I wanted to know if there's any restrictions such as population to where charters can be established.
So there's not a restriction as far as population goes. There are, and let me find it real quickly. Let's see, charters, let me get to the right bill. So I know that the budgeting is impacted depending on the number of individuals, students counted in the A and B for the school. So for example, it would be at least 70 for an elementary school program, 20 for middle school, 40 for high school. Those cutoffs have an impact on the funding for the charter schools under 549. That may provide a practical limit. If there's different funding for schools with low A and B counts, but neither of the bills that I recall addressed population limits.
Thanks, Rob. Is there any more questions for Rob?
I had a quick question. I had been asking a couple of questions about Indian Education for All, and I just had one more clarifying question, and I appreciate you answering these questions, Rob. So I understand that you were pointing out kind of a larger mandate in the Montana Constitution to recognize the cultural heritage of Native tribes, and I understand that that's a constitutional mandate for all publicly funded schools, but IFA is really kind of operationalized under Title 20. I mean, those are kind of the outline definitions and expectations for what that program looks like. And I know that the community choice schools are exempt from Title 20. So if you could maybe kind of clarify what those Indian education requirements might look like in a community choice school, because those schools are not bound to kind of those guidelines set out by Title 20, that would be great.
And I appreciate the distinction you made when talking about House Bill 562 versus House Bill 549, because 549 is still subject to all of the IFA requirements under Title 20. But so in general, and I don't want to sound like too much of a broken record here, but in general, the besides the funding and besides the broader requirement, the specifics of the IFA expectations, requirements could be included in the charter contract. And frankly, they could be more specific as far as the IFA requirements. They could be more targeted at the resources available in the local community. One of the uses I've heard for the community choice schools would be to allow some flexibility in travel locations. And so you're right, it doesn't specifically address the Title 20 IFA requirements, but there is that flexibility, there's that overall mandate, and there's that flexibility in the charter contracting provision to even get more specific about IFA requirements. I know that there are just 3 minutes left. I see the superintendent is unmuted. I know, Superintendent, that you wanted to say a few closing words. I don't want people to feel like they're cut off, but I do appreciate all the good questions we've gotten, and I hope that this provides some information as this legislation starts to become implemented.
Thank you, Rob. I see Michael's got his hand raised and we do have a few minutes left. Michael?
Oh, yes. Thank you for calling on me. I'll make this extremely quick. It's more of a comment, but, as another participant said, House Bill 562 pretty explicitly says it doesn't need to follow local regulations or rules that public schools are entitled to. And there's really nothing that says, I mean, that can be interpreted as including the Montana Constitution. So I just find it problematic, and I guess we will get this issue resolved in court, but that's just how I see it.
Michael, thank you. I just want to also say, and go ahead, Rob.
I just want to say, I understand the comment. I understand the concerns. The specific reference to Title 20 certainly says whatever it is that it says, but it also, what it doesn't say is that it's exempt from the Constitution. And in a rare case of me offering a legal opinion in this chat, I would say that if a statute says explicitly that it is not subject to the Constitution, I would opine that that statute is unconstitutional.
For sure. Well, everyone, I thank you very much for attending this discussion. I hope you like the format. We want to make sure that all voices are heard across our state. We're going to be doing this monthly, and it will be us again with Rob, an hour with Rob in discussing an understanding of what has happened through this legislative process. And I very much appreciate the participation. It looks like we had quite a robust, I'm looking 33, I think at a time. There might have been a little bit more. So everyone, thank you for this. We'll make sure that this recording is going to be available on our website. If anybody would like to see this, please get on to our webpage and pull down the side by side between these two bills. And I wish everyone a good night. Blessings. Stay safe. Thank you.